All right, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to start this off with a cold open real quick, and then I'll explain what we're talking about here. So I think there's generally two kinds of people in the room. If we want to split it up, you could maybe make yourself in a third other group and don't feel bad, but I just want to ask a quick question here. So raise the hands. How many people in this room are selling a product or service to other fintechs? All right, so about half maybe if we're counting real quick. And then how many of you are building a fintech that doesn't sell to other fintechs? So you sell to consumers, government, whatever. Okay, so a little less than the first group. We'll call it 2/3, 1/3. I think this talk is actually interesting for both groups of people. But the reason I ask is because I'm definitely the second group of people. So like the talk will be from that perspective, but it doesn't mean I'm not thinking about the first group, and I understand why you're here because, you know, I buy stuff from you, which is cool, and work with people like you. So thanks for that. But yeah, so I just started there. So quick introduction then about myself. So I'm Corey. I'm the CTO at Braid. Braid, you might have heard us talking up here a little bit before, is a money pooling app. So we do a place for groups of people to collect, save, and spend money. You can think of it as a fancy joint account. It exists somewhere between consumer checking and savings accounts and business accounts. We're kind of the place in the middle where if you have groups of people and you need to organize money with them, that's us. And been working on this since early 2019, so 3 years and some change. And one other sort of, I want to set this up so you can know how I've been thinking about this and like what place in our life cycle we're at as a company. In early 2019, there was a lot less tools than there were now. Like the BaaS software, all the just everybody out in the vendor hall, right? Like there's just so much more available now than there was even 4 years ago. And we're at this place in the company's life where we built a lot of stuff, bought a lot of stuff 4 years ago. We're going through a big sort of growth spurt right now and trying to reevaluate a lot of that. So this talk was born out of going through that process, sort of the like sophomore year of our company of like, okay, what's next? And yeah, so I've been working at Braid for 4 years. Before that, I was at Etsy for a long time, and I helped work on a lot of their like e-commerce infrastructure. So that was sort of my gateway into fintech, was moving money around for e-commerce marketplace. And also, last piece of introduction here is I'm a technologist. I'm not a banker, not a compliance specialist, not any of that stuff. So this whole talk is from the perspective of somebody building a fintech company, not someone worrying about those other pieces of it. All right, so let's hit the problem space here. The way I was thinking about this talk is, if I had titled this talk, "What car should I buy?" and y'all came in here and were like, "Yeah, I want to know, what one should I get?" It's like, I can't just give you an answer, right? It's not you're not gonna walk in, sit down, and say, "I don't know, get a Camry." Cool, talk's over, like peace. There's like a lot, like really the answer to that question is a lot of questions in response. So, well, how often you drive? How many days a week? Where are you going? What are you doing with it? How many people are in your car? Maybe you need a bicycle. It's like there's a long list of questions that sort of get you to that answer yourself. And that's the point I'm trying to take with this talk, which is it's going to sound like a lot of questions, but I'm like trying to help you get to that answer and also show you how we worked this through ourselves. So there's not an easy answer. This all kind of came out of this thought process in my head of, for each individual piece of infrastructure in our system, how do we figure out, if we're going to build it, buy it, borrow it. So there's a similar set of tools among all of us. So whether or not you're selling to other fintechs or selling to consumers or everything else, I think all of us are going to have a similar set of these. And it's like, I can't sit up here for 40 minutes and go through all of them. So it's like, we probably all do KYC, we have a ledger, we do ACH, we do debit cards, we do transaction monitoring, all that stuff. And if I just sat here and I could give 2 minutes to each, and I think that also would be a very unfulfilling talk. So I'm gonna share some different lenses, I think, to go through it holistically. So sort of different ways you can look at this set of decisions and come up with something that I think works for all of these tools. Because even if you get out of the specific fintech stuff, it's like we all have customer support tooling, we do data pipelining, some of you talk to security, to credit bureaus, we do security. So the list is really, really long. So it's trying to come up with some more sort of widely applicable ways to think about this that's going to, I think, hope get you to a solution. One big caveat to that, though. So before we go into talking about different lenses to look at this holistically. There's one specific decision I want to talk about because it influences everything else, and I think it's going to color the rest of the talk, and that is your bank partner. So this slide could be like its whole own talk. So of all the things I just mentioned, one isn't like the others, right? Like how you are legally allowed to move money influences the rest of the decisions you're going to make. There's three general ways about this. One is be a bank. I see one banker in the audience that I at least know. I don't know how many other we got. The number of people actually doing this in the fintech space, really, really low, right? Like I've heard of a couple people buying a bank. I've heard of one other person getting a charter. It's a very minimal space. And like if you're doing that, you're already an expert. So I'm just going to put this aside for this talk, and cool if that's you, like congrats. The second one is money transmitter licenses, MTLs. So this is you go to all, if you're operating in the US, you go to all 50 states and you pay a bunch of compliance people for a year to like convince all of those states you should be legally allowed to move money. If I was trying to say if this is a build versus buy, that like kind of feels like a build. Like you're gonna have to hire a bunch of staff and you're gonna have to like just work at that for 12 months plus. And again, it seems like this is the less common approach, and I also have less experience with it personally. So I'm just kind of putting this one to the side. So the third one we get to, which I think everyone's pretty familiar with here, is you get a bank partner. And like I put it in bold because that's what we did. I think that's what most people I've talked to at this conference have done. And who you partner with if you're going this route is one of the most important decisions you're going to make in the life of your company, because they're going to influence the way all the rest of your system works, how you build it, how it operates, how you're doing compliance, on and on and on. And one other caveat to this, even if you're working with a bank, like some banking as a service layer that's like sitting between you and your bank, you still have a bank. Like you are partnering with a bank no matter how you talk to them with software. And that decision and who you're working with is going to impact all these other decisions. And also, like as someone who's gone through this a couple times now, like no matter how long you think this is going to take to get set up, it's going to take longer. So it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like you can't pad that estimate enough. Okay, so you got a bank. Now what? I'm trying to get onto the part here where I like give you these lenses of like how to think about this. So there's two main directions you can take with your systems. And so this is me saying, okay, you got a bank partner. Now we're going to try to set up all the other systems underneath it that I was talking about before. And I'm going to try to split them into two camps because I think it's easier to talk about it. So the first camp is do it yourself, DIY. This is kind of, I made this name up. I've like hummed and hawed about what to call it. But it's a sort of, you own your own core. You're running your own system. All the data is passing through your system. If you add a third-party partner into it, you're going to do an integration with them. If you have two third-party partners, they're like, you're the central hub of communication there, and you're passing stuff around. This means you're probably holding your own ledger or like doing something like that. You're probably holding a lot of like PII. Like there's a lot of complexity to this, and it's definitely the hard way to do things. And if you go back 5 years, 10 years, like this was the way to do things, right? Like a lot of the more like nice software banking as a service layers that are existing today just didn't exist then, and this is how you did things. But there are advantages to it, right? Like it buys you freedom at cost of complexity in a lot of ways. So then the other one, which I've said a few times, right, is banking as a service. So this means you are renting your core from someone else. So the DIY one is like you own your core, you do all the integrations. Banking as a service, you integrate with one partner. They do a lot of integrations for you. So I know this term gets used a lot of different ways, but like in the purposes of this talk, I'm meaning this is someone sitting between you and your bank partner that's owning like the core operations of like whatever your business is doing, probably ledgering because we're all moving money in some way or the other, and then like whatever else you're up to. And there's like obviously there's a ton of high quality options. I've talked to a bunch of different folks at this conference. Like you're not starved for choice here just because you go this route. And it's obviously easier to get started as well because someone else is doing a lot of the hard stuff for you. The limitation here is you are limited by someone else's choices. So your BaaS provider probably has a card issuer. Okay, now that's the card issuer you're using, right? Like whereas in the DIY one, you have like, try not to quote Spider-Man here, but like you have way more responsibility, but also way more choice in the first one. So that decision is really the core of this talk, because depending on which fork in the road you take there, like every other decision you make is going to look a lot different. So I'm going to run through these lenses now. I got 4 of them. And I think each lens is like what I'm saying is like you can look back and have it influence that decision of BAS versus going at your own, and also all the sub-decisions that sit under that. All right, so I forgot to start my timer. Okay, so first lens, what's your wedge? How is your product excellent? And what I mean by this is like you are doing something as a business that like gives you the right to exist. So you talk to your potential customers. What do you tell them? Like, what do you do? You know, we make better lending decisions than anyone else in a specific vertical. We're way more secure than our competitors. We're the cheapest. Like, whatever it is, like, no shame. Like, you do something that like gets you customers and like wins you business. And this way of looking at build versus buy decisions is about thinking like, what is our wedge? Maybe you have 1, maybe you have 2, but you have to have something. Because if you have 0, you don't have a business. And before I talk about this a little more, I got to give a shout out to an old coworker of mine, Dan McKinley. It's a great URL for this talk he did called Choose Boring Technology. It's boringtechnology.club. I don't know how he got that domain for it. It's great. Go look at it sometime. But the one piece of it that I want to call out here is the thesis of his talk, summed up in my words, is that any company can really only innovate in like a handful of areas. So if you're a great company, maybe you can innovate in 3 areas. If you're a really focused company, you can innovate in 1. But if you try to innovate in 6, 10 areas, like you're really just going to be like fine at them. So my corollary to that though is to be an excellent company, you can't innovate in 0 areas. Like that's the point of this one is like what's your like you got to innovate in 1, and I'm bringing this up because you can't do it in a dozen either. So there's some sweet spot here where you're like doing something better than everyone else. And the other thing you could call is a core competency. So you have to figure out what your core competency is. And so how are you excellent? And then the point I'm going to try to make here is if you can buy it, it's not your wedge. So if you're going to be world-class at something, whatever it is you decided you're going to be world-class at, you better build it. Because if you go buy it, everyone else can buy it, and then now it's not your wedge anymore. It's just a commodity. And the other piece of this, and this is the one that's kind of hard for me to explain sometimes, but what I mean by no blank canvases in fintech. So we have sort of these core primitives that we work with. There's ACH, right? And if you could dig all the way down to the bottom of ACH, someone else was talking about this in a thing earlier today. It's like it's a text file on an SFTP server. However terrifying that is, like that's what ACH is. And there's a certain primitive like that for debit cards and credit cards too, right? There's these files that come in. You can accept an authorization, settle it, like really like basic primitive stuff. And the interesting part of this is every layer that's between you and that primitive functionality actually limits what you can do. And so what I mean by blank canvases is, okay, if you're going to write your own Nacha files, like awesome. Now you've bought yourself a blank canvas. But if you're going to use an API that relies on a gateway layer that then calls the ACH things, now there's a canvas with some painting on it already. Okay, well, someone else has said, okay, well, you can do these things, you can't do these things. Maybe they try to make it as flexible as possible. But in my experience, like, there's always something. Like someone has made some assumptions about how to structure their API or their system so that it's easier to use or better to use, but that also means you can't do certain things. And so, as you know, this is a lot of software engineers here I know, and this is an interesting thing to think about as software engineers because usually we're used to abstraction being power, where it's like, okay, I'm going to program in Python, not assembly, not binary, because I'm going to get so much more done in a day. And that's kind of true here, right? But ultimately, like Python's not a blank canvas, right? There's things you can do in assembly that you can't do in Python, and there's a reason like high-frequency trader people are like writing stuff in C++ or assembly or whatever, because they're like the wedge for high-frequency traders is those milliseconds. So they're willing to go write on a blank canvas with some like really hard-to-write software because they've decided the reason they're going to be world-class is they're going to be milliseconds faster than their competitors. So where I'm going with this is in that same way that high-frequency traders have decided the way we're going to be world-class is by being faster than everybody else, by getting a blank canvas when it comes to performance. You need to figure out what the thing you're trying to be the best at is and make sure you're getting a blank canvas there. So I keep using ACH. Like if you're going to do something weird with your ACH routing, maybe you do need to write raw Nacha files. I mean, maybe you can find a partner that supports the thing you're trying to do, but you need to get as close to the metal there as possible. And if you're doing something commodity, well then of course buy, right? Like why do the like why are you writing software in assembly if you don't care about like milliseconds of performance? And one other example here about this is I think cloud hosting is a really interesting comparison to make. So if you go back 10 years, the only thing you could do if you wanted to run web services at scale is like rent a data center, pay someone to sit there and put servers in racks and like update the software on them. And then all the public clouds came along and now you can just pay someone else to do that and you can push a button and you can have more servers. But that actually looks a lot like a blank canvas because the end result you get if you rent a data center and pay someone to sit there and rack servers is you get like a clean operating system and some like networking and whatever, and you can like build what you want on top of it. And that's actually what Google's selling you, or Amazon or Microsoft or whatever. So you can, I guess I just gave away we're on GCP, but like that's the one I listed first. So the interesting part about that is in cloud hosting, you are actually almost buying a blank canvas. Obviously, like you can argue that for certain sets of problems you're not. But in fintech, it just doesn't seem like that's true as often. With the stuff you go to look at, like looks a lot like less like a blank canvas than a clean, VM you just spooted up on the cloud. Okay, so I've belabored this enough, but I do think the point I'm trying to make here is protect your wedge. So you got to figure out what it is that you're going to do the best at, and then make sure you get as blank a canvas as possible to build that thing on there, and that's that. Then the last like sort of coda to this is if your wedge isn't technological in nature, like that's great to admit that. Like maybe you just have a great way of marketing to a certain niche, a great way of acquiring customers. Well, then all of this is kind of moot, right? Like you should just make as many buy decisions as you can when you're looking at things in this lens, because if you're like, this is what I was saying before, like don't do the hard thing if you don't need the payoff you're getting from that. Okay, cool. I think that's the hardest one to explain. So the other three should be a little easier, hopefully. So number 2, I think the easiest one to explain, unit economics. Okay, how do you make money? What's your customer acquisition cost? What does it cost to service a customer? So all of this is something you need to think about when you're doing a build versus buy decision, especially when you're looking at like different options for buying. So just to like run off some numbers real quick. Maybe you're paying a couple dollars to KYC somebody. You're paying $1 to link and verify a bank account, 50 cents to fund their first account, a couple more cents a month to your bank to keep that account open. Maybe your customer needs a physical card, you're going to mail it to them. So okay, what's that costing to service that customer? You're already in what, $7, $10 if you send them a card, depending on what partners are using, what you built, what you buy. So if you squint at that and then like what are you actually making, like lifetime value for your customers, and it's very, very different for all of our businesses here. Does it even sort to line up? So like, can you afford to buy? So maybe you start looking at a new partner, like, hey, we would love to buy this, this isn't our wedge, it's not our core competency, we want to just bring a partner in to do this for us. But that partner now wants basis points on every ACH, or they want a percentage of your interchange, or they want something, like some incremental cost on top of what you're already doing. Can you buy? Like, I think this is, it feels simple to say it, but I think it gets overlooked in these conversations sometimes. It's like, the margins in payments in this industry, if you got big margins, like more power to you, that's awesome. But like a lot of this payment stuff, it's like we're talking about basis points. Like we have a whole word that's not percentages because like this stuff really matters in this industry. So don't just claim to think about this. Like when you're making a buy decision, you actually have to think, like I hope there's a spreadsheet involved, or something like to figure this out. And so through this lens, you might start to realize that some partnerships just aren't going to play out with your business model. And as much as it sucks, like I've been down this road, which is like, I would love to buy a solution for this problem. All the options in the marketplace are just too expensive. And now you end up in a place where you're like, okay, shoot, well, I guess we got to build something or we got to figure out something specific we can do here. Last bit on this too. The only caveat I want to offer to this is like there is value in time to market. So there might be a world where even though you've done the numbers here and you're like, you know what, this isn't really going to work out in the long term, like we just got to get something in market. Okay, well you can buy then, but now you can't forget about that. Like you better have a plan a year down the road, 2 years down the road, that unless this is going to be a loss leader for you somehow, like that you actually can like swap it out with something that's going to work for you on a unit economics level. Okay, cool. Number 3, operations. So who runs your systems? Where does that expertise live? Who takes point if it breaks? So all of this is about the complexity of this industry. So we have a whole conference about this, and I feel like I'm learning so much. It's like the business of moving money is just not simple. Like as much as we like to maybe, oh man, I give you $1, cool. But it's like it just doesn't work like that. There's so much complexity. So each piece of your system that you're running yourself, is something you need to staff, maintain, monitor, upgrade. There's just so much to this if you are running it in-house. So if you made a build decision instead of a buy decision, like this is the price you pay for doing that, right? So just to give an example here, at Braid, like we don't have hardcore experience in like data security, data tokenization. It's not our wedge, and it fits in our economics to outsource that. So I think like everybody in that space is at this conference. I'm not going to name names, but like we pay someone for that, and that's fine because now if it breaks, like we have to monitor that our integration's working. But if it breaks, there's expertise that doesn't live in our company that we can email or call. That's like on point for that, right? And like that's something we just feel like we'd rather not deal with. And each integration you add is still something that can go wrong, right? To use that example, like we can still have problems with our data tokenization, like that we have to fix. But 80%, 90% of that class of problems, someone else is operating for us. So the point of this lens is kind of the opposite of the first two, which is if you can live with an off-the-shelf solution and that works with your business, like you have a lot of incentive to offload that to someone else, right? So, well, with the what's your wedge one, I was trying to say, when should you protect your ability to build something in-house? This is the opposite. This is when should you realize that like you just don't want to staff a department to manage something that isn't your wedge? Like why are you doing that in-house? And the last bit about this is, how does your bank feel about all this? I just got to mention that. So anytime you're making major changes about this, you're going to bring in a new partner or you're going to do something different, like you still have to ask, right? Like you have to know that the way data is flowing through your system or the way you're handling things is different. Like they're going to have to be part of that decision as well, of like how are you operating your system and are they comfortable with that? Okay. Where are we at here? Okay, we still got time. Sweet. Lens 4. Is it replaceable? And so what I want to get at with this one is you could only plan so far out. I would say if you were able to plan 3 years in the future, like you are doing great. And if you're telling me you're planning 10 years in the future, like you're either at like a Fortune 100 company or you're practicing sorcery, like this industry moves so fast. Like if you look 5 years back, look what's changed, right? It's like it's so different. So this lens for me is about trying to admit to yourself that predicting the future is like a really, really hard problem. And because of that, you want to architect for obsolescence, which is like quite the SAT word. But what I mean by that is you need to plan for your systems so that each individual system can become obsolete. So you might love your KYC system today, but whether or not you built or bought it, you need that integrated into the rest of your system architecture in such a way that 3 years down the road, it can be obsolete and you can switch it out for something else. And it doesn't mean everything's going to become that. It just means one of your 10 systems might be obsolete in 3 years. And the problem is you don't know which one of the 10 it is. So you better plan for it could be any of the 10. And I like to talk about this as strict system boundaries. So this means you should have known channels. So here's how this system communicates with this system. It's these 3 APIs. This is the data that goes back and forth. So that when you need to rip one of those 2 systems out, you're like, okay, well, here's what we got to change. The example I want to give for this one is, I already said a car thing, but we're going to say another car thing. Let's say you bought a car in SoCal. You move up here to Denver. You realize snow exists. You want to drive around on the mountains. You need new tires. The tires on your car, strict system boundaries. It's 5 bolts. Put it on your car. They've been architected for obsolescence. You take it into the shop, or if you're smart enough, you do it yourself. Pull 4 tires off, you put some snow tires on your car, you can drive around in the mountains like you're in business. But if because you lived in SoCal, you bought a convertible and you moved up here, that was not architect for obsolescence, also not strict system boundaries. If you're going to try to get your convertible converted to a hardtop, like you're kind of in for a rough time. And like maybe you just trade it out and get a different car at that point. But I'm stretching this analogy here a bit, but if that's your company, you can't just like trade your company out. Like someone's going to have to go deal with that, and like you're going to have put your engineering team on it, and they're going to be like, oh man, why are we ripping this soft top off this car and putting a hard top on it? It's like, oh, someone should have thought about this before they bought this car. Like, I've been part of that exact conversation. It's like, it's not fun, and sometimes you just have to do it. But so as much as you can, I like to try to hold off scope creep. And so what I mean by this is it's very easy to be like, okay, we've added this system into our architecture. Oh, hey, it has this extra feature. Let's start using that. Oh, we got another feature. Let's start using that. And all of a sudden, like the way one partner is integrated into your system is like, looks like someone's basement, a bunch of cords running everywhere, plugged in everything. So when you go later and try to like figure out how to unwind that, if you decided you want to change it, you're just in like a really tricky spot there. So, and again, this is one of those problems that's not really like solvable. It's just something you have to be thinking about when you're adding new functionality to your system. Is like, okay, like if we ever had to change this, like how would we do it? And the place where this can get like really weird is in the BaaS route, right? So you worked with a BaaS provider, they've kind of made all these architecture decisions for you, and you're working with their APIs. But now if you want to do something they don't support, and like maybe most of them support most things, but like just to give an example, maybe one of them doesn't support real-time payments. And you're like, oh man, we'd love to do RTP. But now if your BaaS provider doesn't offer it, like what are you going to do? You're kind of stuck. Like you either have to completely change BaaS providers or like side hack some weird thing in so that you can do it. Like so. And this is what I was kind of saying about this before, is like, that is the advantage of the DIY approach, is you actually are able to build more strict system boundaries yourself instead of offloading that decision to someone else who may or may not have thought about it in the same way you want to. And this is kind of a case of sort of like misaligned incentives, because sometimes your partners, who mean super well, would like you to remain their partners. So they don't want it easy for you to leave. But as the decision maker architecting your system, you want the opposite thing, right? Like you want what you really want is the partnership to work really well and go on forever. But like if something's not working, you kind of need something, a door open. You need to leave a back door open to yourself to be like, okay, like it's at least not putting a hard top on a convertible problem. It's like a new tires problem. All right, and so what do I got here left? Where are we at? Oh, we got 10 minutes. So I'm sure you're all asking yourself, like, what did I do? So the second part of this talk is I'll run you through how we made the decisions we made about architecting Braid, like through those 4 lenses. So for what's your wedge, I know I didn't mention it a lot before, like Braid is a multi-user account, so it's a fancy joint account that allows people to share money in groups in like lots of different ways. So maybe it's not a joint account with your significant other, it's an account with your 10 flatmates, or an account with your kickball league team, or your class reunion, or your firefighter house. Like any way you need to share money with a group of people, like we help you do it. And so on a technological level, I would say our wedge for supporting that is custom ledger for multi-user accounts. So when we started shopping around for how we were going to support this 4 years ago, we just couldn't find an outsourced system that would allow us to manage the money in the way we wanted to manage it to support these weird flows of funds we had. So we have a kind of a weird flow of funds that we needed some flexibility with. We also have interesting things about compliance issues about who owns those funds. Because if you have 10 people in a joint account and there's a pile of money in there, like who legally owns that money becomes an interesting question. And we found a lot of people that we wanted to partner with didn't want to answer that question in the same way we wanted to answer it. So we had to build this ourselves. And also our debit cards are a little bit weird. We issue one physical debit card, and you might have 10, we call them pools. So you might have 10 pools of money, but only one physical debit card. And at any time, you can choose which pool to spend out of, which with some of the BaaS providers we've talked to, like just gets kind of weird. It's possible, but like again, it's like we wanted some flexibility to be able to change, not only make weird decisions with this upfront, but also down the road, be able to continue to make weirder decisions, whatever we find out are like our customers like the best. So we went that route there. We built that in-house. A lot of other stuff we bought. So for unit economics, there's razor-thin margins because consumers don't want to pay. And like, unfortunately, this is just the truth, right? You can go use Venmo, Square Cash, PayPal, and like the base use case for all those products is just free. Obviously, there's things where they'll get you for a little extra money or something. But we're a consumer payments app at Braid, and like even though we operate differently and we're not competing directly with those other three that I just listed, like consumers still seem to think of us as a similar type of tool, and they expect the same thing. Like they expect free. They got used to it. So any decision we made about what we bought, we had to be very cognizant of incremental costs with those systems. And I kind of referenced this before with the whole basis points comment, but it's like we needed our unit economics to work out at scale when we're offering money movement for free in a lot of cases. We also charge in certain ways, kind of like the other competitors do too. But so we favored tools that don't have incremental costs. So if we were able to buy something for a flat fee a month, awesome. If someone wanted basis points in every transaction, it starts to get a little weird because we got to offer it for free, right? So this actually drove a lot of the decisions early on at Braid, was like, how are we going to piece this together in such a way, and like what do we have to build to be able to actually compete on price, which is none. And like I said, more power to you if you're in a place where like this isn't as big of a problem for you. So for operations, we wanted to be able to mix and match partners, and this is sort of what I said, is like we had a weird flow of funds, weird compliance requirements. So we wanted to be able to use different partners that supported that. So it might have been only one partner in a certain space worked with these like multi-user accounts in the way we wanted to. So we needed to work with them. And so the problem we found, and I guess I sort of skipped over this, like we built this, like we did the DIY route and like didn't go with the BaaS provider. And like because of this, where it's like when you get a BaaS provider, you're getting a whole set of partners that kind of comes with that. They've chosen some of those with you. Whereas we need to be a little pickier about like who we were working with because we have these strange requirements. And this actually like isn't a brag. I think this is actually like the cost we paid for it. So for Lens 1, we really needed this flexibility of flow of funds. For Lens 2, we really needed razor tight margins. So because of that, we had to bring a lot of stuff in-house that maybe in another world we wouldn't have wanted to. And because of that, we've had to have a lot of expertise in-house. So it's like we have to build a lot of integrations ourselves, we have to build a lot of tools ourselves, we have to manage all of those. And honestly, this is like a major strain on our engineering resources because we're just running so much stuff for a small team that maybe we would have rather have outsourced if it fit our needs and like we could afford it. So what I would say is of the 4 lenses I had, we've sort of sacrificed on number 3 to make gains in 1, 2, and 4. So we're paying for this one with the other ones. And then, number 4, is it replaceable? I think we've favored single serve partnerships. So for a lot of our partners, we only use one of their products, even if they offer many. And I know for the sales folks in the audience, like that's like the last thing you want to hear because people want to be able to cross-sell you and upsell you. But we want to use the thing they're best at and like the reason we bring them on. And then I'm very wary of bringing on additional ones because it just becomes that much harder to change things down the road. And I think this is, to speak directly toward the vendors on this point, like I think this is a place where you can make a pitch to companies like me that your systems, even though you're trying to sell me 2 products or 3 products, that they're completely independent entities. Like, okay, this product does not rely on this one. We're selling you 2 separate products, but like they're both standalone, so if you want to keep using one and not the other or vice versa. But I just like, that's not the norm. It seems like it's sort of like, okay, well, you want to use product A, well, that's built on B and that's built on C, so they all come as a package deal. And then that's when I get a little skittish because I'm like, okay, well now like you own more than a third of our system, and like gets harder and harder for that to like get unwound if somewhere down the road it doesn't work out for one reason or the other. And so this is the other reason we sort of avoided the BaaS ecosystem outside of the fact that it just wasn't as mature 4 years ago. But it's like we wanted these single serve partnerships and not entire like systems packaged up ahead of time for us. Okay. And then I'll end with, of course, there's no universal answer here, right? This is the whole way I started this talk off with the like, what car should I buy? I can't give you an answer. Like this is what we did, with the resources we had as a young startup trying to figure out how to piece together a system that's going to work for us. And 4 years in, it's still working, and I'm happy with it. But like I said, 3 years from now, who knows what? Like we might be swapping stuff out, and that's why I'm thinking so much about this and sort of like how do we plan for the future in a way that we can keep growing and scaling. And I really hope showing you how we're thinking this through like gives you some ideas to think through similar problems that you're dealing with. thanks and good luck. And it's just been such a great conference, so thanks to everybody who made it happen, the organizers, sponsors, all you. So thanks for coming. It's 50 after. I don't think they're going to kick us out yet. So if anyone wants to give me a question, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, yeah, in yellow.
Yeah, so you had mentioned, making sure that you can swap out, different components if you need to. When it comes to something like your bank partner,
Yeah.
are they going to work with you on moving those to whoever your new bank partner is, or is that going to be a really painful process to migrate if you were to swap out either your BaaS provider or your actual bank partner if that was a piece that needed to become obsolete?
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat the question for the rest of the room in the video. So let me know if I get it wrong, which is like, it's one thing to think about switching out, I don't know, your debit card issuer, but it's another thing to think about switching out your BaaS provider or your bank partner. Okay, so we haven't worked with a BaaS provider kind of because of that. We were worried about that switch, but we actually are in the middle of switching our bank partner right now, which is just not fun. I don't recommend it. So, and I don't know if I haven't outside of just not doing that, I don't know if I have a good answer for because it's there's just there's so many things there, right? Because you have to get all your, so all of our customers have signed a TOS, like a terms of service that says, hey, even though I'm working with Braid, the app, my money is being held by bank XYZ and I'm cool with that. So now when you switch banks, you have to talk to all your customers and be like, hey, just so you know, this money you've entrusted to us is no longer at bank ABC, it's at bank, whatever, some other bank. And so that process is it's not just technological. There's a lot of legal and compliance and so yeah, I would take up the next couple hours of your life telling you the whole story of how we did this, but yeah, it's not pretty. Okay, cool. Well, I'll be hanging around the rest of the day, so if you think of something, find me in the hallway. Thanks, y'all.